My name is Maren Linden. I'm 17. 11 days after we buried my grandmother, the only home I'd ever had, my stepmother opened a folder and read my step-siblings' tuition out loud, line by line, like a bill I owed. Then she called me selfish for hoarding the $500,000 my dead grandmother left me. "We're one family now," she said. My own father nodded along. I didn't argue. I asked to be excused, walked upstairs, and called the one person my grandmother had warned me about this for. What my stepmother had just started, my grandmother had quietly ended a year before she died. She just didn't know it yet. If this is already sitting heavy in your chest, take a second to like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I like knowing who's with me tonight. I'm Maren. Before I tell you how my grandmother ended it, you need to understand what that house was to me. So let's go back to the summer I was 10. The summer it became the only home I had. The first thing you noticed at my grandmother's house was the smell. Pine and lemon oil. She rubbed that oil into the wood every Sunday. The same circles, the same cloth gone soft from years of it. And the whole house held the scent like it was part of the walls. I pushed the door open the week after the funeral, and it hit me all at once. For a moment I stood in the entry and didn't go any farther. The house was exactly as she'd left it, her reading glasses on the side table, one arm open. A mug in the drying rack. The throw blanket folded over the back of the chair, as she folded it every night. Corners squared, because she said a tidy blanket meant a tidy mind. I could hear the old refrigerator humming in the kitchen. The only sound, and for 1 second, the whole place felt like she'd just stepped out and would be back before the kettle boiled. She built half of what was in that house with her own hands. The shelves in the front room. The long table we ate at. The little stool I used to sit on by the window, low to the floor, sanded smooth on every edge so a child wouldn't catch a splinter. She made that for me when I was small. I never sat anywhere else. Her chair was by the window, a tall one with arms worn pale where her hands had rested for 30 years. Mine sat right beside it, lower, angled in toward hers. That was the arrangement. That was where we drank tea in the afternoons. Her in the big chair, me on the stool, the light coming sideways through the glass. I knew that house in my body. I knew the third stair groaned if you stepped in the middle, so you stepped to the left. I knew the kitchen drawer that stuck in summer and slid in winter. I knew where she hid the good cookies from no one in particular, on the high shelf behind the flour, as if hiding them made them taste better. You don't learn a house like that as a guest. You learn it as something closer to a child of it. "This seat's yours when I'm gone," she told me once, tapping the arm of the stool with one finger. "Don't let anyone move it." I laughed it off. "You do, at that age. You think gone is a word for other people's grandmothers. I didn't know how soon it would come for mine." There was a different house, too. My father's house, where my stepmother had redone every room the year she moved in. White counters, everything put away. A place where you asked before you touched, where I learned to keep my hands folded and my shoes off and my voice down. There were no marks on anything in that house, no rings on the tables, no evidence that anyone had ever leaned on a thing or set down a glass without a coaster. At my grandmother's, the table had 100 small dents, and every one of them was a meal. At my father's, I couldn't find a single place to rest my hand that felt like it would let me. In my father's house, I was a guest who happened to live there. There's one more thing I need you to know before any of the rest of it makes sense. Near the end, before she got sick enough that we all understood what was coming, my grandmother pressed a folded slip of paper into my hand. Just a phone number. No name. She closed my fingers over it with both of her hands and she held them shut a moment longer than she needed to. Looking at me the way she looked at a hinge, she was deciding whether to trust. "If anyone ever pushes you about the money," she said, "you call this, not before." I didn't understand the warning yet. I tucked the paper into the inside pocket of my coat and forgot it was there. The house knew before I did. The summer I was 10, my mother died. There was a phone call. I remember the cold coming up through my hands first. The receiver pressed to my ear, though no one was talking to me anymore. The adults moving around me in a language that went over the top of my head. A car? A road? Words like that. I stood very still in the middle of a kitchen that suddenly belonged to no one. My grandmother came that same night. She didn't say much. She knelt down so her eyes were level with mine, and her sweater smelled like pine. And she put both hands on my shoulders. "You'll come to my house," she said. "You'll be all right there." The house became home that day. My mother was her daughter, Dana. I learned later what it cost a woman in her 60s to bury her own child and then, the same week, stand up straight enough to raise that child's daughter. She never let me see the weight of it. She just made up the small room at the top of the stairs and put a lamp by the bed and started teaching me where things went. My father was alive. I want to be fair about that. He didn't vanish. He drifted. There's a difference, though at 10, you don't have the word for it. You only have the porch light and the waiting. "I'll pick you up Friday, Mare," he'd say. Some Fridays he came, most he didn't. I'd sit at the window with my coat already on, watching the road for headlights that turned into our drive, and more often than not, they belonged to someone else. My grandmother never said a word against him. She'd just come and sit on the arm of the chair after a while and tell me it was getting late, and did I want to help her with something in the kitchen. She never once forgot a Friday. She didn't have a single Friday that was about picking me up. Every day was. That's the thing I understood without being told. She taught me the house like it was a language. How to rub the oil into the grain so it soaked instead of pooled. How to tighten a hinge when a door started to complain. How to sweep the porch so the leaves didn't pile in the corner by the step. My hands learned the work before I knew why she was so patient about it, why she made me do it again when I rushed. "A house keeps you, if you keep it," she said. I thought she was talking about chores. She was teaching me to own it. I just didn't know that yet, and she wasn't ready to tell me. When I was 13, my father remarried. Her name was Sloane. She arrived with a confident handshake and 2 children from before. Brett, who was 15, and Paige, 13, my own age, who looked through me like I was a window. Sloane sold real estate. She had a way of filling a room, of deciding how things would go, and then saying them out loud as if they'd already been agreed. Within a month, the seating at dinner had a shape, and my shape was the chair in the corner, the one farthest from my father. "We're all one family now, aren't we?" She said that first week, smiling, her hand light on my shoulder. I said yes. "You say yes?" I didn't know yet that one family was a thing she could pick up and use as a tool. That those 4 words would come back at a different table, in a different voice, to take something from me. Whenever the new house got to be too much, too white, too careful, too full of people who weren't mine, I went back to my grandmother's. She'd put the kettle on, without asking. I'd take the stool by the window. "Whatever happens over there," she told me once, looking out at the yard, "you have here." Here was running out of time. I just didn't know how little was left. I had one person in the world who saw me. I was about to have none. It was a Saturday in late September when I found her. She was in her chair by the window. The afternoon light was doing the sideways thing it did, laying gold across the floorboards toward her feet. For one whole second, I thought she'd fallen asleep there, the way she sometimes did with a book open against her chest. Her tea was still warm. I touched the cup before I touched her. I don't know why. The cup was warm, and her hand on the arm of the chair was not. And somewhere in the space between those two temperatures, my legs stopped holding me the way legs are supposed to. The house went quiet in a way it never had. Not the ordinary quiet of an afternoon. A different quiet, like the rooms themselves had stopped breathing with her. I don't remember calling anyone. I remember being on the floor by the stool, my back against the seat she'd made for me, and then I remember the kitchen full of people and a long, blank stretch in between that I have never gotten back. The funeral is mostly gone too. I have pieces of it. The church, too cold. A hymn I couldn't make my mouth form. People I half recognized telling me she was in a better place, which is a thing people say when they don't know what else to do with their hands. Sloane wore black and accepted condolences at the door, like a hostess, touching forearms, lowering her voice, and several people told me afterward how lucky I was to have her. I nodded. You nod? What I remember most is the after. Coming back to her house that first time and reaching out of pure habit to call out that I was home, and stopping with the word already in my throat because there was no one in the house to hear it. The kettle she'd never fill again. The cloth folded on the shelf. A house built by a pair of hands that had gone still holding the shape of the person who'd used them. Every chair and shelf and smoothed edge insisting she'd be right back. She wasn't coming back. The house just hadn't been told yet. Neither had I. By the next week, my father and Sloane were handling things. That's the word Sloane used. Handling. She moved through the house with a notebook, opening cabinets, turning over the bottoms of dishes, making small, efficient marks on a page. My grandmother had been gone 6 days. The oilcloth was still folded on the shelf where she'd left it. I watched her pick up things my grandmother had touched every day and assign them a value out loud. The good dishes. We can sell these as a set. The clock on the mantel. That's just clutter. She held my grandmother's reading glasses up to the light, decided they were nothing, and dropped them into a box marked Donate with a small plastic clatter that I felt in my teeth. She wasn't cruel about it. Almost the worst part. She was brisk, efficient, a woman doing a chore. Once probate clears, we list it, Sloane said, not to me exactly, to the room. No reason to sit on an asset. She said asset, I heard home. I stood in the doorway and watched her decide the future of every board my grandmother had sanded. And I understood that to Sloane, this house was a number that hadn't been collected yet. I caught my father in the hallway that evening. I don't think he meant for me to hear it. He had his phone to his ear, talking low to someone, and his shoulders had come down from around his neck for the first time in days, loose, almost relieved. Honestly, he said, the timing, it helps, the timing. My grandmother had been dead a week, and the timing helped. That was the moment something in me went still and cold and final. Not loud. I didn't cry in the hallway. I didn't make a sound. It was more like a stone settling at the bottom of a deep well. You don't hear the splash. You just know it's down there now, and it isn't coming back up. I stopped waiting for him in that hallway. Years of Fridays, and it ended without a word. With my own father relieved that the woman who raised me had died on a convenient schedule. I didn't decide to fight. I wasn't there yet. I just made one small, private decision, standing in that hall with my hand flat against the wall. I would pay attention now. To all of it. To every folder and every phone call and every number Sloane wrote in her notebook. I didn't cry. I just started paying attention. And in the inside pocket of my coat, the folded slip of paper my grandmother had given me waited with its phone number and its 4-word warning. I had a number, I wasn't ready to dial it. They were already moving. So was I, just quieter. 11 days after the funeral, Sloane set the table like it mattered. The good plates, cloth napkins folded into triangles, Brett and Paige in their seats before I'd even come down, which never happened, which told me before anything was said that this dinner had a purpose. My father was at the head of the table. There was a folder beside Sloane's plate, square and beige, and she'd set it down the way you set down something you've been carrying for a while. The folder wasn't for dessert. She opened it. Inside were printed pages, and she turned them so they faced me, and she began to read. Brett's tuition is $26,000 for the year. Paige's is $26,000. There's the registration deposit, the activity fees. She ran one manicured finger down the column as she spoke, line by line, like reading someone an invoice. That's what family money is for. She'd already spent it in her head. Every dollar. I could see it in how smoothly the numbers came, how rehearsed, how each figure already had a place to go. Brett didn't look up from his plate. Paige watched me with a small, interested expression, as if watching a movie she already knew the ending to. Nobody at that table seemed to think there was anything strange about reading a dead woman's gift to her granddaughter as a list of expenses owed to someone else's children. That money was Grandma's, I said. It came out quieter than I wanted. She left it to me. And you're 17, Sloane said, gentle, like she was explaining something obvious to a slow child. You can't even access it yet. Someone has to make responsible decisions, sweetheart. That's what adults are for. That's what family is for. I'd said one thing that mattered. She'd folded it up and handed it back to me as proof I needed managing. I didn't get the chance to say more. Before I could open my mouth again, Sloane closed the folder over her hand and looked at me with an expression arranged to look like patience. Don't be selfish, Maren, she said. We're one family now. And my father, at the head of his own table, in the house my mother used to live in, looked down at his plate and said, She's right, Mare. My father nodded. That was the loudest part of the whole night. Not the folder, not the word selfish, the small downward movement of my father's head, agreeing that I was the problem. I felt my throat close. I felt the heat come up behind my eyes, and I held it, because if I cried, they would call it proof that I was a child who couldn't be trusted with grown-up things, and if I shouted, they would call it proof of the same. So I did the only thing that was mine to do. May I be excused? I pushed my chair in. Gently. I did not let it scrape. I did not let it tip. I slid it back into place against the table the way my grandmother taught me to leave a room, like you respected it even when it didn't respect you. They thought silence meant yes. I went upstairs and unfolded the paper. Before I tell you who answered that phone, I want to ask you something, and I really do read these. If your own father nodded along while someone called you selfish for what your grandmother chose to give you, what would you have done at that table? Tell me in the comments. I want to know. My room was dark. I sat on the edge of the bed with the slip of paper in one hand and my phone in the other. And I read the number 3 times before I dialed it, because once I dialed it, I couldn't undial it. Downstairs, I could still hear them, the scrape of chairs, Sloane's voice carrying up through the floor, light and satisfied, the sound of a woman who believed the evening had gone exactly as planned. Paige laughed at something. A cabinet closed, the ordinary noises of a family that had just decided I was the problem, going on with their night as if nothing had happened, because to them, nothing had. My thumb hovered. Not before, she'd said. Was this before, or was this exactly the moment she meant? I sat there in the dark, long enough that the screen dimmed, and then I pressed the number. And it rang. It rang twice. Maren. A man's voice, low, careful, like he'd been holding the phone in his hand already. She told me you might call. I've been waiting. I didn't recognize the voice. And then I did. Not the voice exactly, but something underneath it. A way of landing on the vowels that I knew from somewhere old and buried. My mother used to sound like that. "Who is this?" I said. "My name is Theo. Theo Linden. I'm your mother's brother." A pause. "Your uncle." "Waiting. For what?" "I don't understand," I said. "Waiting for what?" "For tonight, I think, or a night like it." I heard him breathe out. "Your grandmother set this up a long time ago. She didn't trust the will to protect you, so she went around it, about a year before she passed." "Around it? How do you go around a will?" I must have said it out loud, because Theo answered me, slow and plain, the way you explain something to someone who needs to actually understand it, and not just be reassured. "There's a woman I want you to talk to," he said. "Renata. She worked with the lawyer who helped your grandmother set everything up. Give me a second." There was a click, and a third voice came on the line, older, brisk, kind in a no-nonsense way. "Maren, my name is Renata Voss. I'm going to keep this simple because it is simple, even if it doesn't feel that way right now." She didn't talk down to me. I noticed that immediately, the way you notice warmth in a cold room. "Your grandmother left you money in something called a payable-on-death account. Do you know what that means?" "No. It means the money was yours the moment she died. It didn't go into her estate. It didn't go through the courts. It didn't pass through your father's hands at all. It was payable, on her death, directly to you. She let that sit. There's a custodian on the account because you're not 18 yet. Someone who manages it until your birthday. Do you know who she named?" "My father." "No," Renata said. "Theo." I wrote 3 words on the back of the slip of paper, in the dark, pressing hard so I wouldn't lose them. "Trust, pod, custodian." "What about the house?" I said. "She wants to sell the house." There was a small silence on the line, and in it I heard Renata and Theo exchange something without words. "The house was never your father's to sell," Renata said. "Your grandmother put it into a living trust about a year before she died. Theo is the trustee. The house doesn't belong to the estate. It belongs to the trust for you. If your stepmother has listed that house, she is selling property she has no right to sell." My grandmother's neighbor, Delia Harper, had texted me 2 days before. A photo, a sign on the front lawn of Linden Hollow, for sale, sale pending. I'd stared at it and felt sick and assumed I was powerless, like you do at 17. "How is that even allowed?" I said. "If the house is in the trust, how did she get a buyer on it?" "It isn't allowed. It's pending, not closed," Renata said. "The deed's already recorded in the trust's name. The moment the buyer's side runs a title search before closing, it surfaces. They'll see your stepmother never held title, and the sale dies on the spot. She's racing a clock she doesn't know is running." I wasn't powerless. The sign was a crime. I just hadn't known the word for it. "There's one more thing you should hear," Theo said, and his voice changed. Got quieter. "Your dad. He co-signed on Sloane's debts, Maren. Some of it's her business, some of it's loans on their house. If she goes under, he goes under with her. He's not nodding because he agrees with her. He's drowning, and he's grabbing the nearest thing. I don't know why that landed as hard as it did. It would have been easier, in a way, if my father were simply cruel. Instead, he was weak in a particular shape. Afraid, in debt, choosing the woman who could ruin him over the daughter who couldn't. It didn't make it hurt less. It made it hurt differently. Sloane wasn't planning to ask me, I said slowly. She'd already started selling. She had, Renata said. How long do I have? Your birthday is the 4th of March, Theo said. On that day, this stops being something done to you. It becomes yours. The account, the house, you take control. Until then, the smartest thing you can do is nothing. Let her think she's winning. Don't tip her off. We keep the record clean, and we let it speak when the time comes. 5 months, one date that would cut both ways. The day I'd be able to act, and the last day, Sloane could pretend the house was hers to sell. I hung up knowing something they didn't. Theo flew in from Oregon 2 days later. I'd built a stranger in my head. Some distant uncle, a name on a card I'd never gotten. The man who met me on the steps of my grandmother's house had my mother's hands. Long fingers, a carpenter's knuckles, the same way of holding them slightly curled when he wasn't using them. I saw it before I saw his face, and something in my chest pulled tight and would not loosen. He stopped a few feet away, like he wasn't sure he was allowed closer. "You have her hands," he said. "Dana's hands." For the first time since the funeral, I was not alone in that house. We sat at the long table. He didn't reach for me, didn't perform any of the things people perform at grief. He just sat across from me, with his hands flat on the wood my grandmother had planed smooth, and he let the quiet be there until I was ready to fill it. "Why didn't I know you?" I asked. "Why weren't you ever around?" Theo was quiet for a moment. "Because I let your father push me out, and that's my failure, not yours." He turned a coaster over in his fingers. "After your mom died, Cole closed ranks. New marriage, fresh start, and your mother's side didn't fit the picture. I should have fought to see you. I told myself I was keeping the peace." He looked up. "Your grandmother set me straight. She said fighting at the front door would just get me locked out for good. She told me to be ready instead, to stay close to her, quietly, and be ready for the day you'd need somebody." "Ready for what exactly?" I almost asked it again, but I was beginning to understand the shape of the answer. We talked for a long time after that, longer than I'd talked to anyone in months. He told me about my mother, not the careful, sanded-down version I'd gotten from my father over the years, but the real one. That Dana had been loud where I was quiet. That she'd painted the inside of her closet door bright yellow as a teenager, and our grandmother had pretended to be furious, and then left it there for 30 years. That she sang in the car, badly with the windows down, and that she'd carried me through this very house on her hip the first summer of my life, narrating the rooms to me like a tour guide. She'd have hated all of this, Theo said, what they're doing, but she'd have loved that you didn't fold. That's pure Dana, that is. The not folding. I'd spent so many years with only my grandmother's grief for my mother, and none of her life. Sitting there, getting her back in pieces, the yellow door, the bad singing, I felt something I didn't have a name for. Grief and gladness braided together so tight I couldn't pull them apart. There was a stack of envelopes he'd brought, tied with string. Letters, years of them, between him and my grandmother, the postmarks marching across the front in her small, firm hand. She'd kept a door open the whole time, just not where anyone could see it. Then he slid one more thing across the table. A single envelope, unsealed, my name on the front in her writing. "She wrote this for you," he said. "I think she'd want you to have part of it now. The rest can wait until it's over." I opened it with my thumb. The paper smelled faintly of the house. Her handwriting wandered a little, the way it had near the end, but it was hers. I read the first lines aloud because I needed to hear them in the air, and not just in my head. "Maren, you kept this house alive with your hands when you were too young to know you were doing it. I watched you. It was always going to be yours. Don't let anyone tell you that wanting a home is the same as being greedy." She saw me. She'd seen me all along, and every Sunday I rubbed oil into the grain because she asked me to, in every leaf I swept off the porch. The work hadn't been chores. It had been her watching me earn something neither of us said out loud. I folded the letter back up before I got to the end. I wasn't ready for the last of it yet. "So, what do we do?" I asked. "We don't argue with her," Theo said. He nodded at the box on the side table, a small wooden box my grandmother had made, dovetailed at the corners, where Renata had told me the originals were kept. The trust, the deed, the account papers. "We let the record do it. You keep your head down until your birthday. You don't flinch. Can you do that?" I thought about it honestly before I answered. 5 months of sitting at that table, smiling, while Sloan sold the only home I had. 5 months of saying whatever you think is best to a woman I now understood was robbing me. Every part of me that was 17 wanted to stand up at the next dinner and throw the truth across the table and watch their faces. "It's going to be hard," I said, watching her think she's won. "I know." Theo didn't sugar it. "But the second she knows you've got something, she'll move faster than the law can. She'll hide what she's done, or rush the sale, or get to people first. Right now, she's relaxed. A relaxed person makes mistakes. A cornered one covers them up." He tapped the box once. "Let her stay relaxed. Let her build her own case against herself. All you have to do is be the quiet girl she already thinks you are." It was the opposite of everything my body wanted. And it was exactly what my grandmother had built. Not a fight I'd win by being loud, but a trap she'd already set. That only worked if I held still inside it. "Okay," I said. "I can wait." All I had to do was wait and not flinch. I had real family now. They just didn't share the new half of my last name. For 5 months, I said yes to everything. That was the disguise. Sloan would float a plan across the breakfast counter, the staging company coming to photograph the house, the open house dates, the paperwork she needed me to look at when things settled. And I would nod and say something soft and meaningless and watch her relax. "Whatever you think is best," I'd say. I practiced the face in the mirror before I went down each morning. Pleasant, a little vacant, the face of a girl who had given up. My jaw ached at night from holding it, a dull clench I'd find in the dark when I finally let it go. But the face worked. Sloan stopped watching me the way you stop watching a dog that's finally learned to lie still. Saying yes was the best disguise I had. It cost more than it sounds like. Every dinner was a performance. Sloan would mention the house, the showings, the lovely young couple who'd made an offer. And I'd pass the salt and ask a flat little question about the weather and feel the truth sitting in my chest like a stone I'd swallowed. There were nights I lay awake running it over, the unfairness of having to smile at the woman selling my grandmother's house out from under me and the strange power of knowing something she didn't. I held both at once. Some nights one was heavier, some nights the other. Theo called once a week, always from a number I'd saved as a dentist's office in case anyone looked. He never pushed. He'd ask how I was holding up and tell me a small thing about my mother, that she used to hum when she was nervous, that she'd broken her wrist, falling out of the very oak in my grandmother's yard. And those calls were the thing that got me from one week to the next. Delia, next door to Linden Hollow, kept an eye on the house and texted me when the staging company came and went. A quiet pair of eyes I hadn't asked for and couldn't have done without. "You're doing the hard part," Theo told me on one of those calls. "The waiting. Anybody can throw a punch. Almost nobody can sit still." She wasn't entirely careless, though. I came home one afternoon to find my room not quite as I'd left it. The drawer of my desk was closed a half-inch too far. The clothes in my bottom drawer had been lifted and set back not quite square. Someone had been through my things looking for something. Sloan was in the hall when I came out. "Just tidying," she said, not slowing down. "You leave things everywhere." I'd moved the slip of paper weeks before. It lived inside the lining of my winter coat now, in a pocket I'd re-sewn shut. She was looking for proof that I meant to fight. She wasn't going to find it. I'd made sure there was nothing in that room but a quiet, agreeable girl who said whatever you think is best. The week before my birthday, I went to my grandmother's house alone. The key still worked. The smell still met me at the door. Pine, lemon oil. Fainter now, but there. I walked through the rooms in the late light and ended up where I always ended up, by the window in front of the two chairs. Hers and mine. I sat on the stool she made me, and there, finally, with no one to perform for, I let it come. I won't dress it up. I put my face in my hands and I cried for her, the way I hadn't let myself at the dinner, or in the hallway, or in front of Theo. I cried until the light went gray and the room got cold. I let myself miss her for exactly as long as it took to dry my face. Then I took the wooden box down from the shelf, and I took out the fountain pen she used to sign everything with, the one with the worn brass cap, and I signed the paper Renata had prepared for me. An affidavit. My own account, sworn and notarized, of the years I'd cared for that house, of the things my grandmother had told me about what she wanted. Not a weapon I was firing. A piece of the record. My small true part of it, set down in ink, to stand beside the documents in the box when the time came. I let myself miss her for exactly as long as it took to sign. Then I dried my face and stopped waiting. The countdown narrowed fast after that. The school's tuition deadline was the 2nd of March. The buyer's closing on the house was set for the 6th. My birthday sat between them on the 4th like a hinge. Sloane could feel the dates closing in even if she didn't understand why they should worry her, and she got brittle and she started pushing. She caught me in the kitchen 2 days before my birthday with a single sheet of paper and a pen. "Just sign here," she said, sliding it across the counter, "so we can move forward as a family, before your birthday complicates things." "A family financial agreement," the header said, authorizing the pooling of all household assets, including inherited funds and real property. My signature on it would have meant nothing legally. I was still a minor, and the money and the house weren't mine to give. But she didn't know that. She thought a signature from me cleared her path. I looked at the pen. Her pen. Cheap, plastic, nothing like the one in the box. "Not here," I said. "At the party. I'll sign it at the party, in front of everyone." She blinked. Then she smiled, pleased, because to her that sounded like a girl who wanted credit for being generous in public. I'd just told her where to set the table for her own undoing. She thanked me for it. I wasn't walking into her trap. I was setting the room. She threw me a birthday party. I'll give her this. It looked real from the outside. Streamers in the dining room, a cake on the sideboard, my father's relatives filling the chairs, a few of Sloane's colleagues from the brokerage standing near the window with glasses of wine. 14 people, give or take, aunts and cousins I saw twice a year. A man named Doyle, from her office, who kept checking his watch. 18 candles and a smile on Sloane's face that didn't reach her eyes. People I barely knew kept telling me happy birthday and pressing cards into my hand, and I thanked them, and I watched Sloane work the room. She was good at it. She touched arms and refilled glasses and laughed at the right moments. The picture of a woman who'd opened her home and her heart to her husband's grieving daughter. A few of the aunts looked at her with open admiration. Look how she's taken that girl in. I understood, watching it, that the party wasn't really for me. It was for them. A performance of a generous family, staged in front of an audience who'd repeat the story later, so that when the money changed hands, it would all look like love. She'd seated me directly across from her at the long end of the table. Not beside my father. Across from her, in the full view of the room, like a defendant. My hands were cold under the table. I kept them in my lap, one folded over the other, and I breathed the way I'd practiced. Slow, even, nothing on my face. The floor felt very far away, the way it does when you're about to do something there's no walking back from. I thought about my grandmother's hands closing over mine on that slip of paper. Not before. I'd waited. The waiting was almost done. She'd invited witnesses. So had I. They just hadn't arrived yet. She produced the folder again. The same beige folder, and on top of it, the single-page agreement, and beside it, her cheap plastic pen. She set them in front of me with 2 fingers and slid them the last few inches across the wood. The room had gone quiet, the way rooms do, when everyone can feel something happening, but no one's sure what. A cousin near the end of the table set down her fork. Doyle stopped checking his watch. "Maren's been thinking it over," Sloane said to the table, warm as anything. "And she's ready to do the right thing for the family. Aren't you, sweetheart? Just your signature, and we put all this behind us." Her voice cooled by 1 degree. "Don't embarrass the family, Maren. Sign it." Every face at that table turned to me, waiting for yes. I looked at the pen. I looked at my father, who would not look at me, who was studying the tablecloth like it might save him. I looked at Sloane's smile, holding itself in place. I didn't pick up the pen. "I'm not signing anything," I said, "about a house that isn't yours to sell." I said it once, clearly, and I left it there. I didn't explain. I didn't tell them about the trust, or the account, or the man flying in, or the box on the shelf. I let the sentence stand on its own, plain, in the middle of the table, and I watched it land. The smile froze on her face. It just stopped moving. The warmth still painted on, the eyes gone hard behind it, like a photograph of a smile, rather than the thing itself. "Excuse me," she said, and that was when the front door opened. Theo stepped in first, in a plain jacket, carrying the wooden box under one arm. Renata Voss came behind him with a slim folder of her own. And from the row of chairs by the wall, my grandmother's neighbor, Delia Harper, stood up. She'd been sitting among the guests the whole time, in a cardigan with a wrapped gift on her lap, and not one of them had known why. The room turned. 14 people who'd come for cake, suddenly watching 3 strangers walk into the middle of a family dinner and feeling the temperature change without understanding it. One of the aunts set down her glass. Doyle, by the window, went very still. Theo set the box on the table, gently beside the cake. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The calm of him was its own kind of loud. "I'm sorry to interrupt the party," he said to the room. "My name is Theo Linden. I'm Dana's brother, Maren's uncle, and I'm the trustee of everything Iris left her." You could see the word land on the relatives one by one. Trustee. A few of them looked at Sloane. The story she'd been telling all evening, the generous stepmother, the difficult girl, wobbled in the air in front of everyone. Sloane's hand moved to the table edge. Then it moved again, toward her phone, turning it face up, then face down, a small, useless motion she didn't seem aware of making. "This is a birthday party," she said. "I don't know what you think you're—" "That deed won't matter." She started again, sharper, swinging toward Theo, toward Renata, her voice climbing over the quiet. "Iris changed her mind at the end?" "She did. I have it. I have it in writing. She'd just promised a document that couldn't exist. In front of 14 witnesses, she'd committed to producing a piece of paper, and the only version of that paper she could produce was one she'd have to make herself. She thought louder meant stronger. It never does. The hearing was a week later, on the 11th, in a small county courtroom that smelled like old paper and floor wax. I'd expected something dramatic. It wasn't. It was quiet. Wooden benches, a clerk calling matters in a flat voice, a judge who looked at her file more than she looked at any of us. Theo sat on one side of me, and Renata on the other. The wooden box my grandmother made sat on the table in front of us, dovetailed corners and all. I had my hands flat on my knees to keep them still. The morning after the party, Renata had walked me through what would happen in her plain way. Sloane had a buyer and a deposit and a closing date that was now days away, and she would have to either prove she had the right to sell that house or watch the whole thing collapse on her. The hearing was where that got decided. Theo, as trustee, had brought the matter forward. Sloane's lawyer would have his chance to answer. No shouting, no surprises if we'd done our part. Just the documents. And what they said. "You don't have to say much," Renata had told me in the hall. "The paper says it for you." The record was about to speak. Renata went first. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She laid documents on the table, one at a time, and named each one as it went down. The trust, establishing Linden Hollow as property, held for my benefit. The deed, transferring the house into that trust. The payable-on-death designation on the account. All of it signed and notarized the 14th of September, more than a year before my grandmother died, and clipped to the trust, a letter from her physician, dated the same week, attesting that she was of sound mind. "Signed and notarized," Renata said, with her doctor's letter attached. The house and the account never entered the estate. They were never the father's to manage, and never the stepmother's to sell. Across the aisle, Sloane's lawyer stopped writing. Sloane leaned over and said something fast and low in his ear. He didn't pick his pen back up. I watched her face as the documents went down, one after another, and I watched the certainty go out of it by degrees, the way color leaves a room when the sun moves off it. Then she did the thing she'd promised at the party. Through her lawyer, she produced her own document, a single handwritten page, an amendment, she called it, in what she claimed was my grandmother's hand, leaving the house to the family instead. Renata took it. She looked at it for a moment, unhurried, the way my grandmother used to look at a joint that didn't sit right. Then she set it on the table beside one of the originals from the box, lined the two up, and turned them so the judge could see. 2 signatures. Side by side. They weren't the same. The real one wandered, the way her writing did near the end, the letters connected in her particular way. The other was steadier, neater, a careful copy by someone who had studied it but never lived inside it. And the date on the amendment was the problem that couldn't be talked around. "This page is dated the 2nd of October, Renata said. "Iris Linden died on the 21st of September. She let it sit one beat. She could not have signed anything 11 days after she was already in the ground." A murmur moved through the few people in the gallery. The judge didn't look up from the 2 pages, but something in the set of her mouth changed. Delia Harper was sworn in. She'd known my grandmother 30 years, lived next door the whole time. "I had tea with Iris the week she signed the real papers," Delia said, her voice steady, looking right at the judge and not at Sloane. "Sharpest woman I ever knew." She knew exactly what she was doing and who she was doing it for. The paper Sloane had made to save herself had just put her name on a forgery. It got worse for her, and it got worse from a direction she hadn't watched. The buyer's attorney was there too, the people who'd put money down on Linden Hollow back in November. They had questions of their own. Their client had a signed purchase agreement and a deposit on a house, and they had just learned the seller never owned it. "My client placed a deposit," the buyer's lawyer said, "on a property the seller had no legal right to list or to sell." I watched it travel across the room. The buyer hadn't come to fight me. They'd come to protect their own money, and the moment they understood what Sloane had done, the person they wanted to come after wasn't the 17-year-old in the second row. It was the broker who'd taken their deposit on a house that was never hers. The ally she'd counted on turned, in the space of a sentence, into one more person she owed an answer to. Sloane's own colleague, Doyle, the man from the brokerage who'd checked his watch at my party, was in the gallery, and I watched him get up quietly and step out into the hall, already on his phone. He didn't look back at her once. By the end of the week, her own firm had filed to distance itself from her. The deposit she'd taken, the agreement she'd signed, the listing she'd put her license behind. Every piece of the thing she'd built to take the house became a piece of the case against her. She built the trap. She just stood in it herself. The judge set the papers down and folded her hands. She confirmed the trust. She confirmed the account. She named me owner of the house of record, and she said the words referral and forged instrument in the same flat tone she'd used for everything else, and a different kind of quiet came over Sloane's side of the room. Sloane stood up. "This is ridiculous," she said, too loud for the room. "She's a child." "She is the owner of record," the judge said, without looking up. Sloane's hand came down flat on the table in front of her, hard, and then it just stopped there, pressed to the wood, like the rest of her had caught up to what her hand already knew. I didn't win. The truth did. I just let it. Everyone heard it. No one needed me to raise my voice. If you've ever had to stay calm while someone louder tried to rewrite your worth, you already know it isn't weakness. It's the hardest kind of strength. If that's you, I hope tonight reminds you the quiet ones aren't the ones who lose. Tell me about it if you want to. I'll be reading. Here is what happened to them. Briefly, because they don't deserve the long version. Sloane lost her real estate license after the review. The board didn't take long once the forged amendment was in front of them. A broker who fabricates a dead client's signature is not a broker they keep. The forgery turned a property dispute into something with a criminal file attached to it. The last I heard, that was still working its way through, slowly, on paper, the way these things do. The buyers withdrew and went after their deposit, and the agency she'd built her name on quietly took her name off the door. My father moved out of the house he'd shared with her by the start of April. He came by Linden Hollow once, near the end of all of it, and stood on the porch like a man who wasn't sure the steps would hold him. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't understood how deep he'd let himself get pulled in, with the loans, with her. I let him say it. I didn't tell him it was all right, because it wasn't. And I'm done saying things at that table just to make the silence stop. "I should have stood up for you," he said. "You should have," I said. That was all. He sends messages sometimes. I haven't decided what to do with them yet. Some things you're allowed to leave undecided. Delia, next door, brought over a casserole the week I moved in, the way she'd brought one the week my grandmother died, and she didn't make a speech about it. She just set it on the counter and said the porch step was loose again, and she'd send her grandson over to fix it. That's how people who actually love you tend to say it. Not in folders, in casseroles and loose steps, and showing up. The money is still in the account where my grandmother put it. Theo's name comes off it now that I'm 18, but he hasn't pushed me to touch a dollar of it. "You don't have to decide anything about the money yet," he told me. "It'll wait for you." Justice came on paper the way she planned it. Not in a shout, in a stack of documents and a date that couldn't lie. I finally read the last lines of her letter. I was sitting in her chair this time, not the stool, her chair, the tall one by the window, with the late light coming sideways across the floor the way it always did. The paper still smelled, faintly, of pine and lemon oil. Her handwriting wandered toward the bottom of the page, and I let myself go all the way to the end of it. "I'm leaving you enough that no one can ever call you selfish for having a home." That word will come at you someday, from someone. When it does, I want you to remember it was already answered, a long time before they said it. You were never the greedy one, Maren. You were the one who stayed." She'd answered the word selfish before they ever said it. A year before. She'd heard that dinner coming across all that distance, and she'd written the reply and sealed it in an envelope and left it in her brother's hands, so that on the worst night of my life, the answer was already waiting. I just hadn't opened it yet. I went back to Linden Hollow to stay. The smell met me at the door, the way it always had. Pine and lemon oil, and underneath it, something I can only call hers. I put the kettle on. I took down the oil and the soft cloth, and I rubbed it into the grain of the long table, the same circles she taught me, and the wood drank it the way it always did. Her chair is still by the window. I didn't move it. I didn't move the stool either. I just pulled a second chair up beside hers, for Theo, for the afternoons he comes by now with coffee and stories about my mother I never got to hear. 2 chairs by the window, where there used to be a chair and a stool. The seat she told me not to let anyone move, still exactly where she left it, and a new one beside it, for the family that turned out to be real. The house kept me, just like she said it would. She saw exactly who I was, long before I did.